When I was 13, my parents sent me to St. Barrow's Academy, a small boarding school built on the edge of a forest outside of town, a place that felt detached from everything I'd ever known. It wasn't fancy, just old, brown brick walls, squeaky floors, a smell like damp paper and iron pipes that never went away. My roommate was a boy named Adrian, pale and quiet, the kind of kid you'd mistake for shy until you realized he didn't want to talk at all. At first I thought he was harmless, just odd, but little things about him didn't sit right. The first week he handed me a folded piece of paper and said, "You can't bring these things into the room." I thought it was a joke, but the list was real. It had random stuff written in small, cramped handwriting. No frogs, no mirrors, no salt. I remember staring at the word salt and asking, "Why?" And he said, "Because it keeps them out." I asked what he meant, but he just turned away and started unpacking. From that day on, the room never felt like mine. He kept this small black notebook under his pillow and wrote in it every night before turning off the light. When I asked once what he was writing, he said quietly, "Names." That was all. We didn't talk much after that. I didn't want to. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. One afternoon when he was out, I lifted his pillow and found the notebook. It was filled with names, dozens of them, most crossed out, but a few still untouched. Kids from our school, some I recognized. And there, at the bottom of one page, was my name, Evan, not crossed out. I dropped the notebook and just stood there staring at it, feeling cold. I didn't know what it meant, but something inside me said it wasn't good. When he came back that night, he looked at me differently, like he knew. I couldn't prove it, but I felt it. The next few nights I hardly slept, because every time I'd close my eyes, I'd hear him muttering in the dark, whispering words I didn't recognize, like he was talking to someone who wasn't there. Once I heard him say my name between those mutters, and my heart just stopped. Then one night I woke up and saw him standing by my bed, not moving, not saying a word, just watching me with this faint smile, hands hovering in the air like he was about to reach for me. I screamed so loud that the night supervisor came running, but Adrian just backed away and said I was dreaming. The supervisor scolded me for overreacting and told us to get back to bed. Adrian never broke eye contact. After that, I started sleeping in my friend Lucas's dorm, pretending to study late so I'd have an excuse not to go back. One night, Lucas and I went to my room to grab my charger, and when I opened the door, Adrian was sitting on his bed with a jar in his hands, staring at it like it was alive. When I asked what he was doing, he smiled and said, "They like being contained." I didn't see anything in the jar at first, but then a small garden snake flicked its tongue against the glass. He whispered something to it, something in another language, and the snake coiled up tight. I told him to stop being weird and left. The next morning I found another jar on my desk, sealed with tape, and something moving inside. I didn't open it. I threw it in the trash outside the dorms. That night, I woke to the sound of the jar tapping on the window from outside. I swear it was the same one. I don't know how to explain that. The next few days, everything started feeling wrong in that room. The air felt heavier, like you could taste metal. Adrian stopped going to class. Teachers asked questions but never pressed too hard. One night, I woke up paralyzed, unable to move, and I saw this dark mist forming on the ceiling, like smoke swirling in slow motion. It pulsed, breathing almost. I couldn't scream. I watched it stretch toward me, and I saw something shaped like a hand claw at the bed frame. Then suddenly it flinched away, darting across the room, and the window shattered outward. I could move again. Adrian was snoring in his bed like nothing had happened, but the glass was real. The scratches were real. When I told the dorm supervisor, he said maybe someone had thrown a rock, but it was broken from the inside. The next day, Adrian was gone. His bed stripped clean. They told me he was transferred, no explanation. They moved me to another room and I didn't question it. Years later, after I'd left that school, I tried to look him up online. Nothing. Not a single mention. It was like he'd never existed. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear that whispering, that low muttering in the dark. And I wonder if maybe those names in his notebook weren't people he hated, but people he'd chosen for something. And I still think about my own name, not crossed out, waiting. A few years later, after I'd left school and moved into my first apartment, I thought I'd finally shaken off the weirdness that had followed me around since those days. But the place I rented had a history nobody told me about until much later. It was on the third floor of an old brick building downtown, a narrow unit with warped wooden floors and a single tall window that faced an alley. The rent was cheap because the previous tenant had left suddenly, which I took to mean skip payments, not something darker. The first few weeks were fine, lonely, but quiet. I worked nights at a copy shop and usually came home around 2 a.m., heat humming through the radiators, the city half asleep outside. Then little things started happening, ordinary at first. My keys would vanish from the counter and show up in the bathroom. A cup I left by the sink would be full of water when I got home. Once I found muddy footprints leading from the front door to the window, even though the door had still been locked. I convinced myself I was just tired, maybe half sleepwalking after long shifts. One night I came home and smelled cigarettes, strong and stale, though I didn't smoke. I opened every cupboard, every closet, even the vent under the sink, half expecting to find someone hiding, but there was nothing. That smell lingered until morning. The next night, when I turned off the light to sleep, I heard a faint cough near the window, like someone clearing their throat politely, and I froze. My first thought was that someone was standing on the fire escape, so I yanked open the curtain, but the alley was empty. Still, the smell of smoke drifted in again, and I heard the faint squeak of metal, like a shoe pivoting on the fire escape grate. I barely slept. The following evening, I came home to find my front door slightly open. I was sure I'd locked it. Inside, everything looked normal, except the window was also open, curtains moving in the cold air. I closed it and pushed the latch tight. That night, at exactly 3:11 a.m., a knock woke me up. 3 soft taps from inside the closet. I told myself it had to be pipes or the neighbors, but when I opened the closet, the smell of smoke hit me so strong I started coughing. I flicked the light on, but the bulb popped immediately, showering glass. For a second, as the filament glowed out, I swear I saw a figure crouched among my coats. Thin, bald, eyes reflecting light like a cat's. When darkness filled the room again, there was a rustling sound and a whisper, 2 words I couldn't make out. I bolted, slept in my car until sunrise. The next day I called the landlord and demanded the locks changed. He came over looking uneasy. While he replaced the lock, I asked who'd lived there before me. He hesitated, then said, "A guy named Walter. Died last winter. Heart attack, supposedly. Smoked like a chimney." I asked if he died in the apartment. The landlord didn't answer. That night, I almost convinced myself it was just nerves. But at 3:11 again, the same 3 knocks came, louder this time. I shouted, "Stop it!" and the sound stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt alive, like something listening. I sat awake till dawn, every muscle rigid, watching that closet. In the morning, the closet door was open 3 inches, though I remembered closing it tight. I moved a chair in front of it, thinking that would help me sleep. At 3:11 the following night, instead of knocks, I heard the chair slide slowly across the floor. I didn't even breathe. The door creaked open an inch wider. I packed a bag and left to stay at my friend Nate's place. He didn't believe me at first, but let me crash on his couch. I tried to laugh it off, said maybe I was going crazy from lack of sleep. 2 nights later, Nate shook me awake at 3 a.m. He looked terrified. "Dude," he whispered, "someone just knocked inside my closet." We both sat there staring at the door until we heard it again. 3 soft taps, same rhythm. We opened it together, empty except for the faint smell of cigarettes. I moved out of my apartment the next day. 2 months later, I drove by the building out of morbid curiosity, and the windows of my old unit were boarded up. I asked the landlord why, and he told me there'd been a small fire. "Started in the closet," he said. "Melted the wiring inside the wall." No one had been living there at the time, but they found a cigarette butt lodged in a crack of the floorboards, fresh ash around it, though the place had been sealed. I never told him about the time, about 3:11, about the voice. For a long while after that, every time I smelled cigarette smoke in the street, I'd feel this strange pressure in my chest, like someone watching me, waiting for me to recognize them. I moved 3 more times that year, but sometimes when I wake up in the dark, I swear I can still smell that same old stale smoke, and I hear the faint squeak of a shoe pivoting on metal somewhere just beyond the window. After that second apartment, I promised myself I'd never live alone again, but life has a way of cornering you. A few years later, I took a caretaker job outside town at a small property owned by an old couple who'd moved to Florida. The place was a 2-story farmhouse surrounded by fields a mile from the nearest road. My job was simple: check on the property, keep it clean, make sure the pipes didn't freeze in winter. I thought the isolation would be peaceful, maybe even healing. For the first month it was. The air was clean, the stars were clear, and the only sound at night was the wind moving through the dry grass. But one evening, just as I was closing up for bed, I heard what sounded like footsteps on the porch. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the door. Nothing. Just empty darkness and a swing creaking in the wind. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer. The next morning, though, there were footprints on the porch. Bare human footprints, long and narrow, toes pressed deep in the frost. I stared at them for a long time, feeling a cold trickle of fear run down my spine. They led off the porch and vanished into the grass. That night, I locked every door and window, but around 2 a.m., I heard them again. The same steps circling the house, slow and uneven, pausing beneath each window like whoever it was wanted me to know they were there. I called the sheriff's office, but by the time they arrived, there were no tracks, no one in sight. The deputy gave me a half smile, said, "These old houses creak. Don't let your imagination get you," but he didn't look convinced. A week later, I was cleaning out the basement when I found a wooden box under the stairs. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all old and yellowed, showing people I didn't recognize standing in front of the farmhouse. In every photo, there was the same figure in the background, barely visible, but always there. A tall, thin man with his head tilted slightly, as if watching. Sometimes he was standing in the field, sometimes behind a window. The strangest part was the most recent photo. It was of the house exactly as it looked now. Same paint, same porch furniture. But the date scribbled on the back said 1979. I burned the box that night, but the smell of smoke lingered long after. A few nights later, I woke to the sound of knocking from downstairs. Not on the door, on the walls. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, moving from one side of the house to the other. I lay frozen, listening as it circled, getting closer. Then silence. I stayed awake till dawn, heart pounding. The next morning, I found the back door wide open, latch snapped clean off. I called the owners to tell them, but the number had been disconnected. That day, I drove into town and asked at the diner if anyone knew them. The waitress looked confused and said, "That place hasn't been owned by anyone for years. Burned down in the 80s, didn't it?" I told her I was staying there, and she just stared at me like I was joking. I drove back, half convinced I'd misunderstood her, but when I pulled up, the house looked wrong somehow. Darker, quieter. The air smelled faintly of ash. That night I tried to sleep but kept hearing faint breathing near the foot of the bed, like someone standing just out of reach. At one point I whispered, "Who's there?" And a voice, low and raspy, whispered back, "You know." The footsteps started again, not outside this time, but in the hallway. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The hallway was empty, but the air felt thick and hot, and for a split second I saw a shape at the end of the hall, tall and thin, head tilted the same way as in the photos. My light flickered and the shape was gone. I packed my bag right then, ran to my truck, and drove. I didn't look back until I hit the main road. The house looked smaller from a distance, almost like it was sinking into the ground. I stayed at a motel that night, too scared to sleep. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to a soft knocking on the motel door. 3 slow knocks. My chest locked up. I didn't move. After a few seconds, I heard it again, this time coming from the wall beside my bed. I turned on the light, heart pounding. Nothing. But on the nightstand, someone had left a photograph, the same kind I'd burned. It showed the farmhouse, but this time, in the window of the upstairs room, there was me, holding a flashlight. My hands shook so badly I dropped it. I left that motel before sunrise, and when I came back later with a friend to show him, the room was empty. The manager swore no one had checked me in under that name. No record of me staying there. I haven't gone back to that county since. Every now and then, I get postcards with no return address, old photographs glued on the front, always of houses, always with that same figure somewhere in the background. I've moved 6 times since then, across 3 states, but last week one arrived that froze my blood. It was a picture of my new house taken from across the street, and behind the upstairs window, faint but visible if you look close enough, is that same tall man, head tilted slightly to the side, watching.